Hi, thanks for watching. My name is Jessie, and I'm going to be reviewing The City of Stardust by Georgia Summers. Big thanks to NetGalley for providing an eARC of this book. So the prologue starts with Marianne Everly. Marianne is standing outside her childhood home. Her two brothers are standing in the doorway. It's raining, and her 10-year-old daughter Violet, unbeknownst to Marianne, is watching her. Marianne is leaving. She's going after something. And Violet just assumes that she's coming back. Marianne takes a key from a necklace that she has. She holds it up in the air, she turns it, and she disappears. The rest of the book follows Violet Everly, her daughter. So the brother Ambrose basically takes over as caregiver, parent, father figure to Violet, while Gabriel is off doing something throughout the world, doing work or something. Violet doesn't really know what it is. She assumes it's illegal and she doesn't press him too hard on it. And usually Violet listens in on conversations with that Ambrose has with visitors. However, one night a blonde woman comes to the house. She has a curly-haired boy in tow with her, and she is there to talk about the curse of Ambrose. Violet is unaware of this curse, and so Ambrose specifically tells her she can't listen in on the conversation. She can't hide in the wardrobe. She can't go to her room and pick up the floorboard and listen through the floor. And he wants her to take the blonde woman's assistant around the house and show him. He doesn't look too thrilled with having to leave his guardian's side, and he goes with her begrudgingly. He's grumpy. He doesn't say anything to her, and eventually they end up in the dining room. He pulls out a marble, and it's blue with gold flecks in it, and he starts to kind of pull it apart and push it back together, and like it's clay. But when she touches it, it's solid. And she gives it back to him, and he starts making amazing things. He creates a bird, I believe it is, and then he I think he gives her the bird, and he takes the rest of this material and he expands it into like a galaxy, and they're surrounded by this galaxy, and he's loving the fact that Violet is so amazed by this. And then the blonde woman comes in, and you can tell immediately that she is very angry at what Alexander is doing, and she tells him it's time to go, and they leave. And that's the last they hear or see of them for quite some time. Now, unbeknownst to Violet, this woman, Penelope, is there to remind Ambrose that Violet's mother, Marianne, was supposed to be this generation's Everly sacrifice to pay a debt that her ancestor owed to a god. So Ambrose has done a really good job keeping this from Violet. So good a job that when Violet finds out, listening to a conversation, she gets very mad at the uncles. She feels betrayed by everybody. Her mom, her uncles, just everybody. She's upset, and she wants to find a way to either find her mom or break this curse. And this is years later, when she's older. And so she's working at this she's working at a coffee shop. And sorry, backtrack a little bit. Before she finds out about the curse, Alexander, the curly-haired boy, walks into her coffee shop, and she recognizes him immediately. And she doesn't think he recognizes her, but he does, and then he takes off. She runs after him, and they end up sitting in an alleyway, and he's messing with some Reverite, and he tells her that she has Reverite on her. She has 3 bracelets made of Reverite, which is this material, and it is the metal of the gods. It is used to create magical artifacts that could be used for different purposes. And she's surprised. She didn't realize that they were made of that. Now, Ambrose is still working for Penelope, who reminded Ambrose that Marianne owes the blood debt. And so back at that point, when they visited the house, she told Ambrose that he has 10 years to find Marianne, or she's going to take Violet. At this point, Alexander has shown up because Penelope essentially wants to keep eyes on Violet to make sure she doesn't disappear. And so once Violet finds out about the curse, she takes off. She starts talking with different people. She starts meeting people, and she finds that there's this whole other world. There's a world called Fidelis, which is where Penelope and Alexander reside, and she is trying to get Alexander to take her there. Eventually, she kind of persuades him to take Penelope's key, like the one that Marianne had when she disappeared, so that she can go see Fidelis. Fidelis is full of scholars. They dedicate their lives to learning and to reverite, and they have forges where they make things of reverite, and every year the reverite falls from the sky, and people go out on a net because it falls into a ravine. People go out on a net that they've set up to try to get the reverite, and they burn themselves, and there's the danger of falling. It's this big thing. Well, Penelope finds out that Alexander is planning to bring Violet to Fidelis. And at this point, I'm going to have to warn you that there are probably going to be some spoilers throughout the rest of the video. So Violet eventually she lets Alexander out of her mind a little bit, because he doesn't come back for her. He doesn't take her to Fidelis. He just kind of drops off the face of the planet for a couple of years. And then she's talking to other people, she's meeting people, she's going to parties, and eventually Alexander comes back and he apologizes. He tells her that he's not working for Penelope anymore, and he kind of helps her to get into these parties where scholars are, and they're incredible. They have asterias, which are basically like fortune tellers, and they're holding cards. They're telling people their fortunes. There's a lot of gore at some point in this book. It turns from mere magical realism, high fantasy, into horror fantasy, and the gods are terrifying. Like they're star gods, hence City of Stardust. Fidelis is actually a small part of a bigger world that they came from, that was broken by a god who fell for a mortal. And as you're going through this book, you hear stories about the god who fell for the mortal and what happened. They got married. She gave him a year and a day, and then after a year and a day, she was either going to consume his soul, or she was going to consume the souls of the entire townsfolk. These stories usually had the mortal as the hero. Either he sacrificed himself, or he built himself a cage, or something along those lines. And you get these different stories that change slightly throughout most of the book. And Marianne Everly, Violet's mom, she haunts the book. She's a ghost. She never makes an appearance in the book outside of the prologue, but her disappearance, her presence and subsequent disappearance haunts everybody. It haunts Gabriel and Ambrose, it haunts Violet, it haunts Penelope, and through Penelope it haunts Alexander. And there's this echo of her, and you're expecting her at some point to show up. But this isn't that kind of story. Violet has to save herself if she can, and she's well aware of this at some point. Alexander, who she keeps thinking is her friend, keeps doing things to show that he's not, and eventually she just views him as the enemy. She meets interesting people. She meets his name starts with a C, but he's got connections to the scholars, and he's got a reverite door in one of his houses that actually leads to the other world. And like I was saying, the gods are scary. During her quest mission to find her mom or to break the curse, she meets some of the gods. She meets Tamriel, who is chained in a basement. He's been chained there for centuries by Penelope, and he's actually her cousin, and she's telling him that she's saving him, but he's wasted away. Like, he's barely there, and he wants Violet to give him a hand, like literally, so he could eat the hand or the foot. And he's fast, and he does give Violet some information, and it immediately after Violet leaves this house in the middle of nowhere with a god chained in the basement, Penelope shows up and releases him from his suffering. She also meets another god. I think it was Icariel, and Icariel also asks for blood, and Icariel shows her a door and tells her Marianne went through that door and never came back. And she's almost thinking of it, but this scholar who had Reverite injected in his veins, over the last couple of years, he's been shedding his skin and growing scales, and he believes he is becoming a god. And he kills Icariel with a piece of Reverite. He slashes Icariel's throat, and the gods bleed gold. It was a really incredible book. I'm trying not to give away too many spoilers. So this is absolutely an incredible book. It's fantasy horror, but like magical realism, high fantasy horror. It was incredible. And whatever you're thinking, like if you're thinking that this is a YA novel and that there's going to be some trope with Caspian, that was the name of the guy that she met at the party. If you think that this is going to be like a love triangle between Caspian and Alexander and Violet, you're completely wrong. There's no love interest between Caspian and Violet, and then Alexander and Violet have like severe issues with each other, trust issues, and I mean they obviously have feelings for each other, but it is not quite what it should be for a romantic situation, and they're both aware of it. It was such an incredible book. Like I wish I could tell you some of the more interesting parts, but if I gave you some of the more interesting parts, like it would be severe spoilers, like I said. I don't want to rate this book quite a 5. I was having some trouble with the timeline, and at some point I really thought that we were going to get into that YA trope, and it really felt like it was heading that way. And then the author kind of redeemed the story, but there was like not very many pages, but there were a few pages where you thought it was heading that way. It was so fascinating. I mean, those gods were terrifying. They weren't benevolent. They weren't altruistic. They were selfish. They were violent. They were scary as fuck. Penelope was actually Astriade, which is one of the gods. And okay, this is a severe spoiler alert. So if you don't want to know something that they do, don't listen. Okay, so spoiler alert acknowledged. Penelope eats children. She goes and steals them in the night. And this is one of the things that kind of breaks the relationship between Alexander and Penelope, because Alexander wants to be a scholar so bad, but he's not in the family. He's not in one of the scholar families. And so he doesn't think he's ever going to get there. He's always going to be Penelope's assistant. But Penelope kind of strings him along, like, I'm going to make you a scholar. I'm going to make you a scholar. And then one day she tells him, she's like, well, this is the night and this is your test. Go get me a child. And she sends him to steal a child from an orphanage so that she can eat it. It's fucking scary. Great book. So probably a 4.5 on the Goodreads scale, but it was incredible. I loved it. I would absolutely read more by Georgia Summers. So thanks for watching. Like and subscribe below.